My name's Kai, and I'm 33 now, but this story starts when I was just 13 years old. The day my life split into two timelines. The one my parents thought they were writing, and the one I quietly lived instead. I was left at a gas station off I-70 just outside of Columbus, Ohio. The last words my mother said before the car door slammed shut were, "Maybe now you'll learn not to be a burden." Then the taillights faded into the distance like nothing happened. I stood there in an oversized hoodie and ripped sneakers, gripping a warm soda I hadn't even paid for yet. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just waited for 5 minutes, then 10, then an hour, until I realized this wasn't some kind of sick lesson or bluff. They were gone. For real. You probably think something huge must have happened for them to abandon their only son like that. But the truth? I got a C+ on my math test, and we were running late for my dad's weekend golf trip. That's it. That was enough to push me from unwanted to expendable. My parents had always walked that line with me. Passive-aggressive comments, ignored birthdays, punishments for things I didn't even do. But this was different. This was a decision. A deliberate, clean break. And I understood, in that moment, that I wasn't going home again. I wandered inside the gas station, unsure what I was even supposed to do. The cashier, a tired-looking guy named Tom with a mullet and smudged glasses, looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Your folks take off?" he asked casually, like it was normal. I nodded. He sighed, muttered something about calling child services, but I cut him off. "Can I use your bathroom first?" I needed space, just 5 minutes alone, to think. I locked the door behind me, sat on the cold tile floor, and made the first decision of my real life. I was going to disappear. You have to understand, I didn't hate my parents. Not then. Not yet. I just felt empty, like a piece of luggage that had been forgotten at the terminal. It wasn't anger that moved me forward. It was the numb realization that if I stayed still, someone would come and shove me back into a system I didn't trust. So I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. Out the back door of that gas station, through the lot, into the woods behind it, and just kept going until my legs gave out. The next few years were a blur. Shelters, odd jobs, sleeping in church basements, sometimes on rooftops in the summer. I learned how to survive. I made friends who didn't ask questions, people who taught me things you won't find in any school. I lied about my age. I worked under the table. I kept my head down. And every once in a while, late at night, I'd pull out the crumpled piece of paper with my parents' number on it, the one I memorized before it disintegrated from rain, and I'd wonder what they told people. That I ran away? That I was a lost cause? Or did they erase me completely, like a bad investment? At 17, I got lucky. I met an old mechanic named Reggie who owned a rundown auto shop and needed help lifting parts. He didn't care that I didn't have papers or a last name I wanted to use. He handed me a broom and said, "You clean, you eat." And that was the start. He became something like a father to me, in the quiet way good men do. Never with big speeches, just by showing up every day and trusting me with small things until they grew bigger. With his help, I got a GED, then trade school. Eventually, I got certified, opened my own mobile repair van, and slowly built a life. Not a flashy one, but mine. I never used my real name. Not until I was in my 30s and the fear started to fade. I still had no social media, no digital footprint, no real connections to the world my parents lived in. So when I woke up 3 weeks ago to 29 missed calls from an unknown number and 3 voicemails that made my stomach drop, it felt like a ghost had clawed its way out of the grave. The voice was unmistakable. My mother. Older, raspier, but still with that cool tone like she was doing me a favor just by speaking. "Kai, we really need to speak with you. It's important. Your father isn't well. Call me back." The second message was more clipped. "I know you're angry, but we didn't know what else to do. We've been trying to find you for years." And the third one? It was my father, coughing mid-sentence, wheezing like he'd smoked through the apocalypse. "Kid, it's Dad. If you get this, please. We need your help." I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of it. They needed something. Of course they did. That much hadn't changed. But what stunned me wasn't the calls, it was how they found me. I'd been careful, obsessively so. No real address, no credit cards, nothing that would ever connect me back to them. But I'd let my guard down once. I'd used my real name on a permit application when renewing my mobile van license. That was all it took. I don't know how they got a hold of it, or who pointed them my way, but they had found me. After 20 years. I didn't call back right away. I couldn't. I stared at my phone for hours, listening to the messages over and over, until I felt sick. Part of me wanted to scream, to rage, to finally unload the weight of being thrown away like garbage. But another part, the colder, more calculating one I'd built to survive, wanted to know what they were after. Because it wasn't love. It wasn't closure. It never had been. The next day, I got a knock on my workshop door. Not a call, not a letter, a knock. And when I opened it, I saw her, my mother, older, thinner, wearing a designer coat that didn't match the tiredness in her eyes. Her hands trembled. Her expression softened when she saw me, like she was preparing to cry but hadn't earned the right to. And standing behind her was a man I didn't recognize at first, until he coughed. My father. They looked like ruins of the people I remembered. Fragile, exhausted, like they'd aged in a way no makeup or good posture could hide. Kai, my mother whispered. Please, just hear us out. I didn't say a word. I didn't step back. I didn't invite them in. I just stood there, with my hand still on the doorknob and my pulse climbing in my throat, as the storm I'd buried for 20 years finally reached the surface. And just before I could speak, just as I opened my mouth, my mother pulled something from her purse. A letter. No, not a letter. A contract. It's not what you think, she said quickly, eyes darting to my father, who looked like he wanted to lie down right there on the sidewalk. It's about the house. And the trust. You're our only chance. I blinked and laughed, because of course it was. And that's when I realized. They weren't here to apologize. They were here because they needed me. And for the first time in my life, they were the ones standing on my doorstep. I didn't invite them in. Not right away. I just stood there in the doorway of my small workshop with its half-rusted sign and concrete floors still stained from last week's transmission job, staring at the people who left me behind like I was nothing more than a mistake. My mother held the folder close to her chest like it was some kind of peace offering. I could see her mouth working silently, like she was rehearsing lines she'd practiced in the mirror all the way here. My father leaned on the side of the building, a little out of breath, his face pale and drawn beneath the grizzle of unshaven stubble. He wasn't doing well, that part wasn't a lie. But sympathy wasn't something they'd ever earned from me. I think you've got the wrong person, I said finally, voice low. I didn't slam the door, didn't raise my voice. Just those words. But my mother's reaction, it caught me off guard. Her shoulders sagged, her hands started to shake, and her eyes welled up with tears that didn't fall. No, she whispered. You're not going to do this. Not after everything we've been through to find you. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I didn't want them seeing the life I'd built. Didn't want them stepping 1 inch into the space I'd made for myself. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine, and they didn't deserve to even breathe the air inside it. Everything you've been through? I asked. That's a funny way of framing it. My father coughed. A deep, rattling sound that didn't seem to stop until he leaned forward with one hand bracing the wall. He's dying, my mother said suddenly, desperate now. Lung cancer. Stage 4. The treatments, the debt. There it was. Debt. Not regret. Not guilt. Not even a real apology. Just a number with a dollar sign in front of it. I stared at them both, almost detached. It felt surreal, like I was watching two strangers playing dress-up as my parents. I hadn't heard their voices in 20 years, and now they were using them to ask for help. For money. How long did it take after you left me at that gas station? I asked softly. How long before you stopped checking the news? Before you told people I ran away? My mother flinched like I'd slapped her. I was 13. I continued, my voice sharper now, slicing through the sticky summer air. You dumped me like a piece of trash because I got a C+ and made you late for golf. We panicked, she said, her voice cracking. We thought you'd come back. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't believe she still thought that was a defense. You drove away. That's not panic. That's a choice. My father shifted, trying to speak, but only managed a rasped whisper. You were always so difficult. Difficult, I repeated, stunned. Because I didn't want to play tennis? Because I asked questions? Because I existed? He didn't answer. Just looked away, ashamed, or maybe just annoyed that I wasn't making this easy. My mother took a slow step forward. She looked different, older, more brittle, but her voice? Still rehearsed. Still calculating. Kai, please. The house is in foreclosure. We mortgaged it twice, trying to pay for his treatment. We have nothing left. But there's a trust your grandfather set up. It was locked until you turned 35, but there's a clause that lets you unlock it early if both parents sign off, and if you agree to act as a caretaker. I blinked. Wait, a trust? What trust? She hesitated. Then, as if trying to regain control, she held out the document. Your grandfather, my father, he left it for you. Only you. He didn't trust us. But the clause says if we're both in critical need, and you agree to sign on as family caregiver, you can access it 5 years early. It would save the house and your father's life. I didn't take the folder. I didn't even look at it. Instead, I studied her. The way her fingers twitched, the way she kept glancing behind me like she wanted to peer into my life, to measure what I'd become. And that's when it hit me. They weren't just desperate. They were surprised. Surprised I was still standing. That I wasn't in jail. Or dead. That I hadn't turned into the failure they'd predicted. Let me get this straight, I said quietly. You left me with nothing. You didn't report me missing. You told people I ran away. You never tried to find me. And now, 20 years later, when the walls are closing in on you, suddenly you remember your son exists. My mother's face hardened. Her tears vanished like they were never real to begin with. We didn't come here for a fight, Kai. This isn't about the past. It's about survival. No, I said. It's only about the past. Everything in my life since 13 has been built on surviving what you did. And now you want to cash that in like I'm some kind of investment. Behind me, the sound of a car engine pulled into the lot. It was Lenny, my coworker, early for his shift. I could see him glance curiously at the scene unfolding, but I gave a subtle shake of my head. He didn't approach. I'll think about it, I said finally. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Because part of me wanted to know more about the trust, about the grandfather I barely remembered. And part of me, the broken part, the still bleeding 13-year-old inside, wanted them to sweat. We'll be at the motel off 43, my mother said quietly. Room 217. They left without another word. And as I stood there watching their car disappear down the same highway they abandoned me on, something strange flickered inside me. Not anger, not pity, something colder. Something that wanted to see how far they'd fall, and whether they'd beg before they broke. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the small cot in the back of my workshop, staring at the ceiling, the whir of the old ceiling fan doing little to distract me from the war inside my head. My phone buzzed a few times, unknown number again. I didn't answer. Instead, I pulled open the drawer beside my cot and retrieved an old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were a few artifacts from a life I no longer claimed. A bent library card from middle school, a faded photo of me at 9 holding a science fair trophy, and a folded page I had once ripped from my school yearbook. I looked at the boy in the photo, me, with a crooked smile, and that same old hoodie I wore the day they left me behind. I remembered how excited I was to show them that science trophy. I had waited by the front door for 2 hours with it in my hands until the housekeeper told me they weren't coming home that night. Some charity gala or investment dinner. I didn't even cry back then. Just quietly went to bed with the trophy in my arms like it could make up for the silence. And now they wanted me to save them. The next morning, I showered, shaved, and threw on a clean shirt. Not because I wanted to impress them, but because I didn't want them to see anything they could twist into weakness. I drove out to the motel. Not the nice kind with free breakfast and fake plants in the lobby. This was the kind with peeling paint and a flickering vacancy sign. Room 217. I knocked once. The door opened almost immediately. My mother must have been standing just on the other side, waiting. She looked surprised to see me dressed well, holding coffee, and not dragging a chip on my shoulder. My father was propped up in bed behind her, oxygen tank hissing softly beside him. His skin had turned that sickly yellow-gray, and his eyes were sunken, glassy. I didn't feel sorry. I just noted it, like a mechanic diagnosing a car with too many problems to fix. I brought you this, I said, handing her the extra coffee. Don't read into it. She took it carefully. Thank you. I sat down in the worn armchair by the window. She sat opposite me, and for a long moment, we didn't speak. Then I broke the silence. Tell me everything. The real version. No rehearsed lines. My mother blinked. Then she nodded, like she'd been waiting for that challenge. My father, she began, was a hard man. Cold. Worse than your father, in some ways. But he loved control more than anything. He didn't trust anyone. When I told him I was pregnant, he told me straight to my face that if the child turned out to be anything less than perfect, he'd disown me. He kept his word. She looked out the window. When you were born, he saw something in you. I don't know what. He never told me. But by the time you were 5, he had set up a trust. I didn't know the details until years later, but the core of it was simple. It's yours, and only yours, and you'd only get access if you stayed clean, legal, and unreachable until you were 35. No crimes. No addictions. No scandals. He wanted to test your resilience, as he put it. I raised an eyebrow. So he designed it like a loyalty test? She nodded. He didn't trust us. Not me. Not your father. We were spending more than we had, and he knew it. So he locked the money behind a wall we couldn't touch. But he put in that clause, that if you agreed to become our legal caretaker in case of terminal illness, and if we both signed a waiver, you could access it 5 years early. My stomach twisted. It wasn't the money. It was the manipulation, even from the grave. And how much is it? I asked. She hesitated. A little over 700,000. Silence again. That number rang in my ears. Not because I wanted it, but because it was more than they'd ever given me in love, attention, or safety combined. I looked at my father. He wasn't listening. He was asleep now, or pretending to be. I wondered if he even knew where he was. If he remembered the gas station. If he remembered the look on my face when he drove off. Why didn't you ever come back? I asked suddenly. My mother flinched. I did, she whispered. 3 days later. I drove back. I waited at that station for hours. But you were gone. And I couldn't. I didn't know what to do. 3 days. I repeated. You waited 3 days? Her hands clenched around the coffee cup. I told myself it was for your own good, she said, her voice thin and brittle. That you were better off without us. That you'd find a family who deserved you. But the truth is, I was ashamed. Ashamed and scared. I didn't want to tell people what we'd done. So I let the lie stand. I stared at her, trying to read between the lines. But there was nothing left to read. Just silence, desperation, and the pathetic, wilted remains of 2 people who had once ruled my life. And now here they were, asking me to sign something that would erase the past. Not in their minds, but in the legal system. I stood up. I'll think about it, I said. But I already knew the answer. I just hadn't decided how I wanted to deliver it. Back at the shop, I pulled the papers out of the envelope she had snuck into my van. My name was there. My real name. The one I hadn't used in 20 years. The clause was real. The money was real. The terms were sickeningly clear. And there, scribbled in the margins, was a note in her handwriting. You're our only hope. I stared at it for a long time. Then I picked up my phone, not to call them, but to call someone else. A lawyer. Because if they thought I was going to walk into this trap without a net of my own, they hadn't learned anything at all. I didn't call them back right away. I met with the lawyer first. Her name was Maya Rios, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney recommended to me by a friend in town who'd gone through a brutal inheritance dispute of his own. She didn't ask too many questions when I told her I hadn't seen my parents in 2 decades. Just raised her eyebrows when I handed over the documents. She flipped through the papers in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Then she closed the folder slowly, took off her glasses, and leaned back. Well, she said, they definitely didn't think you'd have representation. I gave a dry laugh. That sounds like them. They've played this smart, she said, but not clean. The trust language is airtight, but the clause about critical illness and caretaker status? That's open to interpretation, if challenged in probate court. But if you sign this. She tapped the last page with her index finger. You legally bind yourself as their dependent caretaker, which means once that's signed, they get everything they want. Full access to your trust. And you get saddled with legal obligations you may not want. Even if I never take a cent. I asked. Doesn't matter. The moment you sign, they can argue that you're acting on their behalf. It would be nearly impossible to contest later. She leaned forward. You'd lose control. And I have a feeling that's something you haven't let happen in a long time. I nodded slowly. That was all I needed to hear. I didn't want their forgiveness. I didn't want reconciliation. I didn't even want the money, really. I wanted peace. And peace, for me, meant knowing they'd never be able to manipulate me again. Never twist the narrative. Never look me in the eye and say, see, we raised a good kid after all. They didn't raise me. I raised myself. The next day, I drove to the motel again, but I didn't go alone. Maya came with me. She wore a sleek blazer, carried a briefcase, and had a calm fire in her voice that made grown men sweat in depositions. My parents didn't expect her. My mother opened the door, her expression brightening slightly when she saw me. and then flickering with confusion when Maya stepped up beside me. "This is my attorney," I said simply. My mother blinked. "You're what?" "Don't worry," Maya said smoothly, stepping inside before they could react. "We're just here to clarify some things. If everyone's acting in good faith, this shouldn't be a problem." My father was sitting up in bed, wearing a thin oxygen tube and the same stained shirt from 2 days ago. He looked worse now, sunken, hollow, distant. He stared at me like he wasn't entirely sure I was real. Maya opened her briefcase, pulled out a few documents, and began speaking in calm, measured tones. "My client has reviewed the proposed agreement. While we understand the urgency of your situation, we found some concerning language in the caretaker clause. As such, Mr. Ellis will not be signing the agreement as written." My mother's lips thinned. "Then what are we even doing here?" "We're offering an alternative," Maya said. "Kai is willing to waive his claim to the trust entirely. However, we're filing a restraining order effective immediately, along with a public affidavit stating the full circumstances surrounding his abandonment at age 13. This will be submitted to the trust's original administrative board. If you attempt to access the trust under fraudulent pretenses, you'll be committing perjury, and we will pursue charges." I watched the blood drain from my mother's face. She opened her mouth to speak, but I cut her off. "You don't get to rewrite the story," I said. "You left me. You didn't come back. And now you're looking for a lifeline you never earned." Her voice cracked. "You'd really do that? Let your father die just to prove a point?" I stepped closer, calm as ice. "No," I said. "He's going to die either way. I'm just making sure he doesn't die thinking he got away with it." My father finally spoke, his voice weak but bitter. "You always were dramatic. And you always were a coward," I said. "I got good at reading people, Dad. You know why? Because I spent years wondering what I did wrong. And then I realized I didn't do anything wrong. I was just inconvenient, an obstacle. And when I got old enough to ask questions, you didn't like the mirror I held up." My mother's hands were trembling now. "Please, Kai. We're your family." "No," I said. "You were my family. Now you're just two people I used to know." Maya gathered the papers and handed them a copy of the affidavit. My mother tried to tear it in half, but her hands were too shaky. She just crumpled it in her lap and looked away. As we turned to leave, I paused at the door. "There's something else," I said. "You told people I ran away, that I was a troubled kid. You never filed a missing person report. That lie followed me my whole life. I got turned away from shelters, hospitals, jobs, because I had no record, no history. You erased me." My mother opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "So I've already contacted the police," I continued. I told them my full story. "There's an investigation opening into the abandonment of a minor. Statute of limitations might not cover everything, but at the very least, you'll have to answer some questions. On record." "You're bluffing," my father rasped. I looked at Maya. She pulled out a second folder. "Here's the case number," she said. "You'll be hearing from a detective next week." We left. They didn't try to stop us. Outside, the sun was high, and the air smelled like hot asphalt and old motel chlorine. For the first time in a long time, I felt light. Like a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had finally slid off my shoulders. Back at the workshop, I closed early. I took the rest of the day off and drove to the park near the edge of town, the one with the rusted jungle gym and the broken swing set. I used to sleep there some nights, curled up under the slide with a knife in my pocket and one eye open. I sat on the same bench I used to sit on when I was 15, watching families walk by, pretending one of them might notice me. Now, no one needed to. I was no longer invisible. I hadn't just survived them. I'd outlived them, outgrown them, outsmarted them. A week later, I got the official letter from the trust board. The inheritance was still in place, but now frozen indefinitely until the board reviewed my legal challenge. My parents wouldn't get a cent. 2 weeks after that, I received another letter, this time handwritten, with no return address. It was from my mother. It said 3 things. "I'm sorry. You ruined us. Please don't come to the funeral." I folded the letter and placed it in the shoebox with the rest of my past. And I didn't go, because I had already buried them the day they left me at that gas station. The rest? That was just cleanup.